like a bird on a tree. I'm just sitting here, I got time, it's clear to see. From up here, the world seems small. We can sit together, it's so beautiful, you and me. We meant to be in the great outdoors, forever free. Sometimes you need to go and take a step back to see the truth around you. From a distance you can tell. You and me were meant to be in the great outdoors, forever free. You and me, meant to be in the great outdoors, forever free.
Welcome to part 4 of my series Going My Way, where you will be hearing testimonies of God encounters and how people have been guided by God through their lives. Now, I've shown you in this series that Australia is a beautiful country, and indeed it still is. But as you've probably heard on the news, in 2020 and earlier, Australia's been ravaged by massive bushfires right down the east coast, burning across 4 states actually. And even our city of Melbourne has been inundated with smoke haze on several occasions. Now, Australia's been used to this for a long time because there are long droughts, as there are in other places of the world. And of course, when you've had a drought for a few years and along comes a short burst of very hot weather and gusty winds, then of course you've got the chance of massive bushfires just taking off and spreading like wildfire very quickly. But of course the Bible does forecast that there will come a time when regardless of what one can say about climate change, the Bible promises in the book of Revelation, and even Jesus promised that in Matthew chapter 24, that there will come times towards the end of the world when the environment will suffer, both man and animals and the fields. And Jesus called this, the beginning of this phase, the time of beginning of sorrows. And I don't know whether you're familiar with the writings of Jonathan Cahn. He's an amazing prophet in America. And I've heard him saying on television that he can virtually do a mathematical countdown for the end of the world. Now, I'm not surprised at that because I can do that too. And of course, the Bible is tomorrow's newspaper. What we read in here is tomorrow's news. And a very dear friend of mine back in 2015 produced a time chart which displays all the prophetic scriptures that show us the details of the various events that are going to be playing themselves out according to the book of Revelations, the book of Daniel, and other prophets, Hosea and Joel, and all these things. And when you patch it together, you can virtually point with a finger at the place over here where Jesus said will be the beginning of sorrows. Now, this is why I thought in this episode to show you some of the beauties of Australia, but then also the ravaging bushfires. And you can put it down to climate change and man's intervention, but God has allowed all of this to happen, and He's going to allow worse to come. And it's interesting, if you read the book of Revelation 3, you'll find that as things get worse and worse, God Himself says, and the people still did not repent. In other words, God has allowed these things to happen and to escalate because He wants people to repent. And it's not just a matter of praying, oh Lord, please give us some rain, please put that fire out, please protect my house, which people can testify. And I've got a wonderful lady coming up later testifying how an angel protected a house. But what God wants is a true repentance where people will go back to the Word of God and live lives as disciples of Jesus, and not just prayer, a quick prayer when we're in trouble. So today, in the testimonies, my aim here is to show, yes, terrible times lie ahead, not just for the church, but for everybody. But God is a worker of miracles. And as Psalm 91 says, that if we're under the shadow of His wings, He will protect us. We will see terrible things around us, but He will protect us. And so in this series, I'm going to start off with a testimony from a couple who've seen amazing miracles happen. And so they'll tell us of their experiences, what they've seen in St Kilda here in Melbourne. Now, I've seen miracles like that as well, but they've got a wonderful testimony and they explain it so well. So we'll start off with that just to show that when you live the life of Christ, then you can expect signs and wonders following and God's divine protection in our lives. And hopefully you'll see that there's nothing to fear that's ahead, provided you're living under the shadow of his wings. So for me, Psalm 91 is just such a wonderful psalm. So do enjoy the testimonies, and then of course this series is going to be continuing into hopefully another 5 or 10 episodes. So thank you very much. Gary and Glenda, it's been wonderful to be able to film your testimonies and your playing on your instruments in your home, and we had a lovely lunch here. Thanks very much for that. But yeah, that's great, Gary. Thank you. And but over the lunch, you and Glenda started telling me about some amazing things you witnessed in Melbourne quite some time ago, and I think our viewers ought to hear about it because it's real and it has happened.
Right.
And God is in the business of miracles.
Absolutely.
They don't always happen, but when they do, they are amazing.
They are amazing. Now, I think Glenda knows the person a little bit more than me, but I did witness it. I was there at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And Glenda just explains a little bit of the background here.
Well, our story goes back to when I was only 17 and Gary was 18. And we got permission from the head man from our church. Could we please go to this other church because we'd heard about some miracles that were happening there. And we knew that this pastor was very reluctant to let someone from his flock stray away from him. So we got his permission. He reluctantly said, yes, you can go, but make sure you come back. So we turned up there. It was in South Melbourne, and we were going to hear a man called Billy Mangum from the USA. And we'd heard what a tremendous evangelist he was. And when we got there, there didn't seem to be any singing that I can remember, but this man, Billy Mangum, was striding up and down the platform, and he was praying with his head up to heaven. And he did that for about half an hour to 3/4 of an hour, and we thought, when's this man going to start? But obviously he was getting in tune with God and wanted miracles in this place. So then when he'd finished his very, very long prayer, he had an altar call, and the ones that needed prayer, they were to come out the front. So he had them all lined up on a raised up section of a theatre, where the actors usually perform, and they were all sitting along the edge of the platform there. And he went along there and prayed for everybody. But 3 of those cases stood out in my mind. The first one was a woman. She would have been, 250 pounds, no worries. Huge woman, the biggest woman I think I've ever seen. And she wanted prayer because she couldn't lose weight, and she wanted to lose weight desperately, so he prayed for her. And at the end of his prayer, he said, now what I want you to do, I want you to run 7 times around this big hall. And of course everybody said to themselves, oh, the poor woman, she'll die if she has to do that, she's so big. But she obeyed. She did what he said, and slowly at first, and then gradually picked up speed. And she kept it up even while he was praying for the rest of the people. And by the end of the night, the weight had dropped right off her, and she was a thin woman. That was one case. The second case was a girl about 16 who was a friend of a friend of mine, and she was the daughter of that friend, and she was about 16, and she had had polio as a child, and she had one leg shorter than the other by at least 3 inches, which would be like 10 centimetres, a bit under, about 8 centimetres, I reckon. And it was a very thin leg, and the other leg was normal. Well, he prayed for her, and immediately at the end of his prayer, the leg started growing, and it came in like this. It just went very, very slowly until about 10 minutes later, it had completely joined, became level with the other leg. And she had a brace on that leg, and the brace would have had to move with her leg. There was no other explanation. It couldn't move unless God touched the brace as well. That's my feeling. So that's another miracle, and of course everybody, the house just went wild. Everyone just praised the Lord after that. Then the third case was of one of the ushers in the church there. Also went out for prayer. I'm not sure why he went out there, but the Billy Mangum perceived that there was something not quite right within him. And he started talking to this man at first, just talking to him while he was just sitting there, and he was answering him back. And then Billy Mangum would start provoking him, asking him questions, and where did he come from, and who was he, and all these questions. And it's so long ago I can't remember his answers, but in the end, he started growling like a lion, and he was getting angry because he was being, obviously, God was putting his finger on him and trying to get him to confess who he was. So in the end, Billy Mangum somehow got him on the ground. I don't know whether he hit him to go down or whether he pushed him down. I can't remember that bit, but he ended up laying on his back, and Billy Mangum put his Bible on his chest and knelt on him, his whole body weight on top of the Bible, and kept him down on the ground. And then he started commanding a devil, if you like, to come out from him. And of course it was resisting really bad, and he was really yelling out and really performing this demon. It wasn't going to come out.
And it was in a different voice, Glenda.
It was like a lion, a voice like a roaring lion, a really horrible voice. But I reckon he would have been at him for at least half an hour trying to get this thing to come out. And in the end it came out. And I don't remember how. Do you remember do you remember what he said after it came out? I can't remember. It's just gone from my mind.
Well, in that particular instance, he was the man. Well, he was he'd be a man of that age, of 20 or 21 or something like that.
Yes, but what was he saying after the demon came out?
Well, the demon was saying, "No, I'm not coming out." And of course, Billy Mangum would still pray over him for
but
that.
What did he say at the end?
I can't remember at the time, but he was definitely resisting the word of the Lord. But in the end, the man was relaxed and relieved and stood up as a different person, because he had that obviously a demon or something that was troubling him at the time, and he was released from that. And there you go, yes.
I think that's the end of the story. We can't remember much more.
No. But Glenda and Gary, I've seen some amazing miracles, especially back in 1976. When was this?
Yes, in the
roughly?
1970s, somewhere there, early
And
1970s.
somebody told me there was a tremendous outbreak of miracles round
Yes.
about that time.
Yes, there
That would have
was,
been-
definitely, yes.
And since then, we still see the occasional miracle. I've seen the occasional miracle, but it's not as prevalent as it was in those days. And like I myself find, I often still end up at the doctor's place or in the hospital or whatever for our conditions, but we know that the Lord can touch people in a miraculous way.
Absolutely, yes.
Just
I believe there's certain ministries that do this sort of thing. They say these things don't go out except by prayer and fasting. You have to be have a tremendous interest in God and His Word, and be tremendously close to the Lord to get this type of a miracle happen. So I believe that in those days there wasn't as much opposition like there is these days, like with the media and stuff like that. You have to be very careful what you put out into the church place these days. But in those days, it was very, very, very prevalent.
yeah. Yes, I called to my mind a healing ministry by Smith Wigglesworth, I believe his name was. And he had a most unusual way of tackling people who were quite ill.
Mm-hmm.
If they had a cancer in the stomach, he would actually hit them in the stomach and people would gasp, how dare he touch the poor guy. But then minutes later, that guy would be healed.
Mm.
And so everybody would forgive him. And one of the accounts I read, he grabbed his baby and threw him across the platform. But the baby got healed.
I wouldn't like them to do that to my babies.
No, but in his case, they got healed. But of course, today, that just wouldn't be allowed.
No, well,
No,
I think
you'd end up in jail.
I think
Yeah.
man's reasoning gets in the way of God's power. Basically, that's what I think it is.
I don't think there's as a much of a knowledge of the spirit world in these, like today, like there was back in the 70s and before the 70s.
Yeah,
I think it was more prevalent then.
yeah. Well, thank you very much, Gary and Glenda. It was lovely to hear that, because I saw this miracle of a tooth being healed, and it stayed with me all my life. Just seeing that, as a scientist, to have seen that, I was just blown away. So thanks for sharing
yes.
that.
Well, with that girl that had that leg,
Yeah.
Glenda said it took 10 minutes. I believe it took about 30 seconds.
No, it didn't. No, it
30
was longer.
seconds coming together.
no, it
that
was
was
much
very
longer.
quick.
Well, he was at least half an hour praying over her.
Well, it might have been, but
No.
when the movement appeared to be a lot quicker than that.
Yeah, well, I've seen short legs being lengthened to match the good leg, and what I've seen, that can happen over a space of about 1 minute.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah, that's
gradually, you almost believe it's not moving, but it's
Yes.
always moving millimetre by millimetre
That's
by
right.
millimetre.
We've seen hundreds of those,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
this one was this much.
Yeah, and the width of the leg increased to match the other leg.
It did. Matched
that's-
exactly. And when she stood up, both legs were level, and she just walked normal. Whereas before she'd been had crutches, and she was having trouble walking.
Yeah.
She just walked like a normal person. We couldn't believe that. Her
Yeah,
foot was
some
right
of
on. Her
that-
foot was right on the ground.
Yeah.
They were definitely miracles back in those days. But I mean, it's just man's mind that gets in between.
Yeah, my belief is it's going to come back, especially as we're approaching the end.
Yes, yes.
Mighty miracles are going to happen. Well, thank you once again.
That's okay. You're welcome.
Hi, my name's Jenny and I'm going to read a testimony for a lady called Anne-Marie. So here's her testimony. This lady, whose testimony I'm reading out, has a moving story about God's providential care and guidance in her life, even before she fully followed the Lord. Growing up in the West Indies, she was christened in a Methodist church and was brought up by a strict Catholic father. When she began a nursing career and moved to the UK, she slowly began to find her own faith in Jesus, which has matured rapidly over the last few years in Australia. She is so grateful to the Lord that she could not testify before the camera because she became emotionally overcome. But she has asked us to read a testimony for you. She says, "My story is about God's providential care and guidance in my life. It was my 30th birthday and I decided to go on a holiday with my girlfriend. It was part of my recovery process as I'd recently lost my dad. The problem was that I was just coming to terms after the death of my mother 5 years previously, and then to lose my dad so soon was a bit much. I guess it's something we did not like to think about when you're only 25 years old. We would like to have them in our lives a little longer. Both deaths were quick and unexpected, but they could also have been prevented. I am a nurse now and realise that. I guess it was God's way of telling me that their time had come to rest. So the choice of a getaway holiday was on the island of Kos in Greece. On the first night, my girlfriend and I decided to walk into town to have something to eat, and we ended up in an area surrounded by many other English tourists. There I met a young guy who was also on holiday from the UK on his own. He had arrived the day before we did. We arranged to meet again the next day, and by the third day we were exploring the island together as our friendship developed. By the end of the holiday, we agreed to exchange telephone numbers and to contact each other on our return to England. About a week after returning to England, I had a phone call from David wanting to meet for a meal. When we exchanged addresses, we were both startled to discover that we only lived 15 minutes away from each other. Isn't God amazing? The rest is history. We've since been together for 25 years and we have been married for 21 years. As I'm experiencing Christianity in a new light and have grown in Christ since then, I have come to realise that all of us have a journey in God, and no one apart from God knows what is in store for us. David and I were brought together. The funny thing was that we both had to travel to the Mediterranean to find each other, even though we lived in the same city in England. This was part of my journey that God had planned for me. On reflection, when we look back to events in our lives, we realise we wouldn't be the person today if we didn't have those life experiences to develop and grow. David and I were at a point in our life that we were ready to start a family. We both wanted children, but that was not the case. After several years of trying and having IVF without success, we decided that we needed to move on with our lives. Instead of pondering on what we wanted, be grateful for what we have. We decided to close the door on that chapter in our lives and move on. We decided to go along the process of adoption. We realised that there are many children in this world who are parentless due to unforeseeable circumstances, and maybe we could have something to offer a child, a home, love and security in their life as a family. We then registered and began in a counselling group which we had to attend as part of the adoption program. At the end of our first meeting, I remember the counsellor mentioning to the couples that if we decided not to continue with the program, we needed to inform them of our change of heart or doubts, and that if we were to find ourselves pregnant, we would have to withdraw from the program. At that point, I smiled to myself, thinking, why would we put ourselves through this if we could get pregnant? If we could get pregnant, we wouldn't be there in the first place. But a week later, I was contacting the counsellor to inform them that my husband and I are expecting our baby. I still get a shiver when I tell someone of my journey. Just as I was giving up hope, Surprise! Never expect the unexpected. Nothing is impossible. I went on to have 2 further pregnancies. This falls in line with my journey that I'm travelling with God. I cannot explain what happened to me and why it had to happen, but I do know that it was meant to be, and that I've learned from my experience not to feel bitter, but become a wiser person on this journey that God has mapped out for me.
Interesting. Good come today
Great to
and share
see you.
on camera.
Yeah.
It's great that you're willing to give your testimony, and people will love it, I'm sure.
Oh, we're happy to share.
Yeah, because we're doing it for God. And I understand you are able to come next week to my birthday, 80th birthday.
Yeah.
But you have to leave early because you've volunteered to work with Youth Alive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's at the Margaret Court Arena, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be huge.
Yeah, it is.
Very
My
exciting.
grandson's going there to do the audio visuals.
Awesome, we'll be heading with him as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And you're there for security, provide security.
That's right. So any illegal substances, we're on it.
Oh, really?
Oh, I have no idea. Actually.
Who knows?
Oh, very
I think
good.
we're just supposed to be greeting, not patting people down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Cool. So I want to talk about the temptation of Christ, especially after he was baptized. So when Jesus was baptized, he went into the desert for about 40 days. And that was when he was tempted by Satan. And my testimony is very similar to that. When after I was baptized, I had 3 tests of my faith. So I want to share that with everybody. So my first test of faith was my bike being stolen after volunteering for a bike event. I felt surprised, upset and disappointed. Surprised because it was only a few meters away from me that my bike was stolen. And I was pretty upset because that was the only time where I didn't actually lock my bike, and what do you know, it gets stolen. And I felt like it was a big thing because I had that proximity to do something, but I just missed it. So it was a harsh lesson for me that I should keep my valuables safe at all times. But it also made me realize that the experiences matter more than the bicycle itself. So my bike can be replaced, but the memories could not be replaced. Also, to let go of the new things. To let things go for the new things to arrive. So whether it's in your terms or not your terms, God is the provider who will take care of us. My second test of faith was when my car was broken into, which was just a couple days after my bike was stolen. So I felt a bit empty, lost and scared. Empty because when they broke into my car, my laptop was stolen. And yes, it's a valuable, but it was more so the content and the photos that was in there that really brought more joy and memories for me. I was lost because no one was there to help me during that time. And I was really scared because I didn't feel safe anymore. But I knew that God was still there and He was protecting me and continuing to provide comfort for me. It made me seek what is and isn't important. I'm still capable to live and continue my life even without these things. So it's a good lesson, but it's also a hard lesson to learn as well. It also made me realize that connecting and building friendship was more important, because you got to be grateful for what is in your life, and people are the things that are most appreciative, or people are most valuable in your life, and those other valuables can be replaced.
Andrew, can I ask you a question? When this happened to you, how long had you been a Christian?
I was a Christian for 2 weeks.
For 2 weeks?
Yeah, so this was after I was baptized. So
Wow.
I got
Where were you baptized? Here in Australia or
I was baptized in Canada.
Canada?
Mm.
That's why your wife has a Canadian accent.
Yeah.
Now all makes sense. All right, I'll let you continue.
Cool, no worries. And lastly, my third test of faith was when someone was trying to break into my camper van while I was sleeping. So I felt very scared and very challenged at that point as well. Scared for my life because they tried to break into my van while I was sleeping. They were rocking and knocking my camper van and I just didn't know what to do. And at that point, I was just praying for God to keep me safe and to protect me. And luckily, He was there, not knowing that, but He did protect me there at that point. That was a hard lesson for me there as well. Being a new Christian, I really had to put a lot of faith and trust and belief in God at that moment. So praying for that safety and protection at that moment really saved me from that huge challenge. And it's hard to overcome it when you're just new as well. So that moment, it made me realize that even though when your life is being rocked and knocked and tumbled and you're struggling, you really do have to trust in God that He is providing you the right path to His kingdom. Whether you'd like it or not, it's a building. It's testing you, it's forming you, and it's creating you to be a better person. So lastly, I just want to leave this scripture to everybody. Isaiah 43:19, New Living Translation. For I'm about to do something new. See, I have already begun. Do you not see it? I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I will create rivers in the dry wasteland. That's it.
Hi, I'm Christy. So, I'm very unprepared for today, but I have been not roped into this, but I thought if I could help a few people with my testimony, then why not? So I didn't come from a Christian background. I came from a Buddhist and a Catholic home. So we had really good morals. My mom was from a Buddhist home and my dad was from a Catholic background. But we had good morals, but we didn't really know why we had them. So in Buddhism, it's sort of, there's karma. If you do good things would happen to you. And if you do bad things will come back to you. So it's all sort of works-based. So we did have a good moral base. You know, we ate our vegetables, we brushed our teeth. Sometimes we didn't floss, but good morals. So when I was 15, though, I had two friends in high school back in Canada who were Christians, and they brought me to a youth event. So youth events could change people's lives when you bring people to something. I'm preaching to myself right now, actually. Bring people to church. It's harder than you would think, but I went to these youth events and they were fun. I didn't really know much about God or Jesus. I just kept going because I wanted to, rock climb, laser tag, do all those things. But eventually I felt like there's something to be grasped here, and I felt like I always was searching for a reason of why I existed. So I always wondered about my future. I always wondered about what my life really means, and is this it? Do we just wake up, eat, go to work or go to school and then go to sleep and that's it? Or is there something more? And it's Jesus. Jesus is the only thing that really, really matters at the end of everything, is that, I suppose that's the thing though, out of all the religions in the world, and I was raised a Buddhist is a good religion, let me tell you, even as a Christian. I would say Buddhism is a good religion, but it doesn't give you the why or the love that Jesus brings to the world. And you know that something special is there because, you know, when people are moved by love and the message is based on love, that's the only thing that actually really matters. So eventually I gave my life over to Christ. After continuing these youth events, I eventually gave my life over to Christ. It was a gradual process, but that's where it took me, I guess. And what really changed is I kept going to church, but I knew that I wanted more. I didn't want to just sit on a Sunday and I didn't want to just read the word. I wanted my life to be more, but I didn't know how it was going to be. So I think about Revelations 3:15-17. It says, I know you inside out, this is the Message version, and find little to my liking. You're not cold, you're not hot. Far better to be cold or hot. You're stale, you're stagnant, you make me want to vomit. You brag, I'm rich, I've got it made, I need nothing from anyone, oblivious that in fact you're pitiful, blind, beggar, threadbare, and homeless. So, yeah, I think all the things that I really wanted in my life, whether it was a great career, great family, it just, those aren't the end goals really in itself. And I feel like Christ really gave me my purpose on what I really, really should live for in my life. So when I graduated university, I went off to Japan, and I left really precarious circumstances back home. My father was really ill with cancer. There was a lot of stresses, there was a lot of burdens in our family, and I just wanted to breathe. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Like I could barely finish my academic career, let alone think about my future. I just felt very stuck. I just felt like the situation that was in with my family being so ill and so helpless, I just felt like very, very stuck. But eventually I went off to Japan to teach English because I just wanted to escape. I just wanted to live my own life, start my career. And in Japan, where my mom is from, that's really where my life changed. My relationship with God changed from being, I wanted to be hot, but I didn't know how. And I remember in Japan, I was just very isolated, very lost. And of course, God knows everything. So he found some Christians to meet me where I was at, and they invited me to church. And I thought, all right, church is not really what I need right now. I need stability. I need all these other things. Even though I was already a Christian, I didn't think that God was what I really needed. I thought all the things that he could provide with his hands are what I really needed. So I went off to this church. There was a lot of things going on. There were all these things that day that almost prevented me from going, but God still had me there. And when I went to the worship in Osaka, it was a branch off Hillsong Church. I just remember like all this weight was lifted off my shoulders. And I thought, wow, even though I'm a Christian, I didn't depend on God at all in the last 5 years. I didn't give him anything of my burdens. I didn't trust him to know that my life was going to be better. And I didn't trust him with my circumstances. And my relationship totally changed from then on. Yeah, so that was one of the moments, I think. You know, sometimes some of us, our circumstances are just too much and it's too hard to handle. And that's, in the hard times, I think that's where God speaks most. So if we let ourselves be a bit more softer, that's where God can speak. So I hope that might give you a little bit more for your life too.
It's wonderful.
Amen.
I love that. Now, could you tell us what made you come to Australia?
Sure. Marriage! I'm married now! Yay! So I've been married a year and a half. We got married right here in church.
Let's see that ring again. I'll focus in on it.
All right, it's stackable. Anyways, Christians, don't be materialistic, because I didn't have this stackable ring before. I had it a year later. But this is a Wonder Woman ring here. Wonder Woman from DC. She's a powerful woman.
Yeah.
There we go. So anyways, yes, so ladies, don't let men walk all over you. Make sure they put a ring on it. Make sure they love Christ first of all. Yeah, and make sure they commit. And then you can share life with them. So, yeah, I met a really, really great Christian guy. The guy who was living in a van on one of the testimonies. You might meet him. So that's my husband. So he was just the snowboarding, free-spirited guy just roaming around Canada. And we met in church. I never thought I would meet anyone in church, to tell you the truth. I know this is where Christians meet, but my church did not have any people who were single that were eligible. So I honestly did not even think maybe I'm meant to be single, at that point, because I got married later. But you know what? God had it, and He gave me someone who loves Christ. That's very important, someone who would put Christ above anything. So yes, that is the reason. So we got married here in Melbourne last year at Life Ministry Church, and it just opened up for us, Australia. So we prayed lots. It was very, very quick in many terms. But yeah, we're in the 1 year and a half mark, and yeah, it's fun. Marriage is good. It's fun. Yes. Is that a good testimony? Yeah. So wait for the right one. Yeah. Okay, so I forgot to tell you something. That 2011 year, when I was teaching in Japan, actually it was the 2011 earthquake in Japan. It was March 11th, 2011, so that's my mom's birthday. She was back in Canada, and I was in Japan teaching, and then suddenly there was an earthquake on the Richter scale. It was about 9.2, I remember. It was the biggest one in the century of the world. And I was there, and I was teaching at this junior high school, and the graduation ceremony just finished, and there was shaking. And when you're shaking like that for about 15 seconds, that's a long time. 15 seconds is nothing if you're watching YouTube or eating pizza, but 15 seconds in an earthquake is terrifying, because everything is shaking and you feel that the earth is moving underneath you. So those 15 seconds were over, and the teachers looked over and said, "Are you all right? That's an earthquake in Japan." And they said, "Well, we'll just check to see what the Richter scale is." And it was 9.2, 5 hours away. And the fact that I could feel it in Osaka, it meant that it was a big deal. And then there was probably destruction up in the north. And there was. It caused a bunch of tsunamis in the Fukushima region, and it also led to a nuclear leakage from the power plant in Fukushima. So it is probably the second worst nuclear leakage probably in history since 30 years ago in Chernobyl in the Ukraine. And I remember thinking, God, what do I have to do now? Because I was so in my head and so just self-centered, I guess. I was sort of like, oh, I can't figure out my own life, cry. When the world around me was actually being distracted, and lots of people lost their lives, a lot of people lost their homes. They lost more than I've ever lost in my whole life, all in just a few seconds, all in a minute. And that was when I said, God, I've got to stop being so within myself, I said, God, help me trust you. I said, the world literally is falling apart in Japan. There's literally disasters here that's been happening and taking people's lives. And I said, show me what's more important. So I realized in that time, I had Christian friends, and some of them went to help out in the initiative to clear the nuclear, the nuclear waste. It was a really tough time in terms of that you couldn't stay more than 24 hours because it was just so powerful. It could make you really ill for life. But some of the first people who were there were Christians in Japan. So I thought, this is really what life is about. It's not about preserving our own life. It's actually about giving your life. And I think through that I realized, just with getting more involved and helping people who were refugees relocate in Japan, that I realized through other Christians that our lives aren't ours to keep, and that when God gave us our life and He gave us His love, I realized that our life isn't ours to preserve, but it really is. The cross made more sense to me, and that Jesus dying on the cross, that sacrificial thing, is really about the love He has for all of us. And I realized that in a very, very real way. And did my life change a little bit for the better? Yes. And am I always sacrificial? No, not at all. But I can say that because of that moment, I have been instilled with that, I guess, remembrance, that promise that if I am up against something that I don't know, that I just go to God immediately now. I don't play games anymore with God, thinking I could figure it out. I just say, God, I'm in a place. Help me. Help me, God. That's it. And I think that not everybody needs to have a natural disaster in their life. I hope that many people can avoid it, in fact. But for me, maybe that's what I needed, because I didn't really understand. I didn't really understand what sacrificial love was. I didn't know what grace was. I didn't know what the love of Christ was. So that really helped me out for life. So thank you, God.